I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hi everyone, welcome to Player Tools Efficient Play. And no, David, we're not going to break a man on Thursday.
No.
Or at least hopefully not.
No, Mark, we're not.
Linda, you're not that kind of an interviewer, right?
God damn it. We're fuzzy and friendly interviewers who are like, tell us about the stuff you like to do.
It's a puff piece.
Yes. Anywho.
Alright. So welcome to Player Tools Efficient Play, where we talk about how can you as a player be more efficient so that you can get more of the fun stuff into every session.
So, shall we talk about some of the things that tend to drag and how to get around that dragging?
Sure. Do we want to do it case by case? Why don't you start?
All right. So one of the things that I've certainly found in our sessions that drags is oh yeah, I forgot to level up, and I forgot to decide what kinds of items I would want to buy, and that kind of thing. So
how can you handle that?
How can you handle that? Well, spend some time in between sessions deciding what kind of items you might want to buy if that's open, and deciding how you want to build your character for that next level. When the GM tells you, hey, you leveled up, please do go ahead and level up.
Oh wow, thanks for gifting the subs, Ultra.
Thank you.
So, how do you handle the prisoner's dilemma situation of everyone learning through many times that a lot of other people aren't going to level up, so then they themselves don't level up because then they would just have to sit there when everyone else is leveling up?
Honestly, that's something that we haven't quite mastered for our home group, because our home group does get into that situation quite often. David says another option is to know your character out to 20th level. I know, yes, some people like to build all the way out. I guess I would say at the very least, make sure you're not going to be the last person. So, like, if you have a character that it has, like, a lot of complicated decisions to make, and you're like, oh yeah, well, other people are going to need to level up too, you're going to be the one who's holding people up. Versus if you're like, okay, I may want to wait to decide on this feat or whatever until we're all gathered together. That's kind of a different point. So having at least an idea of where you want to go is a good plan.
That makes sense. All right.
But I mean, what would you recommend for dealing with that?
Well,
I know sometimes we've just sort of gone on and been like, you can kind of level up as we go along, but we're going to continue with the story. And then that
eventually
means that
you kind of have to do that.
And then that means that if you didn't finish leveling up, your character's just going to be weaker until you finish getting your stuff together.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to do it. I agree. We haven't quite mastered getting our very busy players to do that.
Oh, well, thanks, Elftro.
Yeah, thanks, Elftro.
Even more subs.
Elftro gifted those subs so many times and so quickly that it probably almost triggered a hype train.
Just for that, yeah. But I mean, this is also the player tool version of it, not the GM tool version of it. So don't be that guy. Level up your character.
That's right.
Decide what kinds of things. When the GM says that you have some money, decide you want to decide what kinds of things you want to buy with it. It's also useful for players to have the discussion outside of the main session about what kinds of things they want to sell or what kind of items they may want to buy together as a group. And this also goes for other things that advance that aren't your primary leveling up. So, like, let's say you have a subsystem that's going on, like the Persona system in War for the Crown, and your character is going to want to advance in that way. Deciding in advance what you might want to do is useful. And another one that comes up is that we've used quite a bit is if the GM ends a session on a cliffhanger of like, oh yeah, your characters have some time to think through this decision that they're going to make. It's totally useful if you spend some time outside of session thinking about how your character might approach that problem, so that you're ready when you jump in to say, hey, why don't we, it's like, okay, why don't we try to sneak around the back way and see if we can bribe a guard or something like that, rather than starting off from the beginning where nobody's really thought about it, and then the GM rebriefs people, and then you start thinking from there, and then it actually takes longer than if you hadn't had the cliffhanger.
All right. Oh wow, it looks like Wrath of the Righteous did reach 2 million. They have like 4 hours left on their Kickstarter. I was curious, would they hit 2 million? And the answer is yes, they did.
So if you're watching this on Discord, if you're watching this on Twitch and not on YouTube, then there's still time.
Yep.
But yes, you just squirreled on the efficiency episode.
I sure did.
Mark.
I did it. We're being pretty efficient though.
But I do think that those are two of the frequent things that we find with our group that the GM will set up to say, oh yeah, you know, this is the end of the session, you can level up, you can plan these things out, but if nobody actually does that, then it doesn't work.
That makes sense. So there is sort of a lead by example. If you're the person who always has it ready ahead of time, then you can be the person who convinces other people to get it ready, and someone needs to be the first person who gets that whole process
and if you're
started.
the one who then can start the conversation,
that's right,
then it's like, oh hey, if you're the one who gives the recap of some of the things that happened in the last session, so that the GM isn't doing that at the same time that he or she or they are setting up everything else, then that can totally help with speeding things along. It also can help reviewing your notes right beforehand so that you remember what's happening if you've got like a group wiki or something like that, and particularly if it's been a while, so that you can jump into the game faster and have less of that spin up time.
Alright, so in terms of efficiency, I think it makes sense that we also started with session start, because starting and ending something, whether it's your game session or even just working and you're trying to do workflow and then another task suddenly interrupts you, starting or ending something have spin up and cooldown costs, and a game is just like anything else. So we've talked about in between work that you just sort of refuse to do and to try to do that, but there's also other setup costs that we would want to talk about as well. Even if you have everything completely squared for your character in your home game or your org play game, when you sit down at the table, there's certain ways that you can get started and get in the right headspace for the game and get yourself set up that are a little more efficient than others. So, for example, if you have a good way to keep track of your character and your notes and any other little props you have, like a special miniature or a table tent, such that you can pull them out and set them out quickly and efficiently. There's usually one person per table who's just like, you know, kind of fishing around for a while for stuff. So if that can be, if enough people can sort of use efficient packing and set up, in that case, you can save a fairly significant amount of time at the start of the session.
Like, make sure if you have a digital character sheet that you have access to that character sheet, things like that. Just making sure you've got all your stuff in
you even
advance.
downloaded a copy, even if it's usually online, just in case. But that's especially important for organized play if you're at a convention where you're going table to table and you have to reset up every time that you start another game. If you're in a home group and you have a long day planned, then hey, the setup costs and the pickup costs only happen once. Yeah. But at a convention, they happen every single slot. So those can really add up.
And at a convention, I find that that I have a lot more characters than I could reasonably possibly play. So one thing that I found really useful at conventions is leaving things back in my room that I'm definitely not going to need that day, and only bringing, say, some characters that I might be choosing from. So that in general, like, you don't have to bring your entire suite of everything.
Right.
If you know that you're only going to need a few bits.
Joe Jungers recommends possibly having a team Google Sheet for loot tracking and character tracking. I know we use something similar to try to track down sales of a huge amount of loot, like right before the end of Jade Region.
Yes.
Sometimes the same kind of shared organizational tools you would use at work can be actually helpful when you're playing for efficiency as well. Something that everyone can see and that whoever has the time can use is helpful, because a typical group is very capable but also very busy, and therefore they need something that can help with that situation. So also in terms of setting up, there is not just a physical aspect, but much like the vigilante class when you're changing between identities, there's sort of a cognitive aspect of getting into the game mode. Even if you're, as a player, you're not necessarily a method actor who needs to, like, get deeply into the character's mindset. There's still sort of transitioning from whatever you were doing before, whether that was driving to the game night or wandering through the convention and trying to muster your table, or even preparing for guests to come over. You have to sort of go from that headspace into the space of a player.
And I think one of the ones that we see a lot for home games, if you have a regular group, sort of making that transition point between you're just kind of generically chatting and, okay, we're going to play now.
Especially if these are friends that you don't get to see a lot of, but you do see for the game group. You're not going to want to be like some kind of, draconian disciplinarian where you're like, we are here and we are now starting, and you will not talk to each other and you will not be friendly. You don't want to do that.
But if you notice that, like, in general, people are looking to get started, and that's the atmosphere that things are going toward. The GM is getting things out, being ready to jump in and get started with the game.
Yeah, your group is going to determine how much of that sort of, like, chit-chatting you do at the beginning and the end of sessions. And if you spend an hour chit-chatting and the chit-chatting is what people want to do, that's okay. This is not the episode that says every game moment must be the most efficient. The idea is to play efficiently so you can have more time on what you want. And what you want might be the chit-chatting, but it might not. So be cognizant. If you are the chit-chatter and other people seem like they kind of want to get going, but they're being polite and still talking to you, just kind of gauge the rest of the group as a player and just try to go along with that and figure out what people are in for. All right.
Because we found with our sessions it usually works well to sort of check in with people as they come in, and then we sometimes chat at the end afterwards, but we play pretty regularly, so. It's David says a dragon with the disciplinarian template, and Stump Monkey says Mark has been spying on my sessions. Just kidding.
Was I spying on it because of the 1 hour of chit chatting, or because of the we are here and we're playing now?
I'm gonna guess the first.
Either way, chit chatting at the beginning of sessions is sort of one of the stereotypical start of session aspects. Even if you don't have it, just sort of getting into the mindset and getting started. There are other things a GM can do to help getting started, and we even have episodes about that involving pop recap or throw you right into the action and several different techniques. But as a player, that doesn't matter. What matters is actually the meta, where your head is at, who you're still talking to, and where you're going to go next.
I would say, like, if you need a break for whatever reason, like, letting people know that you need a break, and then it's time so that people can take a break overall, as opposed to, like, having you kind of there because, oh, wait, you have to text with someone for a little while, and then you're going to space out and things like that. If you're like, hey, I need to talk to this person real quick, can we take a break for a few minutes? Then go, make the call, go ahead and wrap that situation up rather than being distracted for a while.
And that's as true throughout the game as it is at the beginning of the game, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but yes, if you know there's something you're going to have to do at some point during the game also, like, let's say you have to call your doctor and make an appointment at some point during that day. You might want to do that at the beginning so that it doesn't interrupt for the same flow things that we've been talking about.
Or in the middle when people are taking it.
Yes,
like
or during somebody else's break if there's a planned break. Or at the end. But creating your own new break for making a phone call is usually a good way to add extra inefficiency. And therefore not a good way to
that's why I was saying like if you but there's also a difference between like if something comes up, just kind of having it going on in the background for a while, distracting you, versus just like going and taking care of it, and then everybody takes like a 5-10 minute break.
Yep. That makes sense. So, we've talked about setting up. Now let's talk about some things that we can do that are efficient during play.
Well, actually, there's another transition period that we often have, and Katrina alludes to it here is the meal break. You often have like a longer break in the middle of sessions where people go off and then they might all eat together. They might go eat separately if they're virtual or things like that, and then they convene back together. So this is a great time to take care of those other little side things that might come up.
Do you think it's worth talking about
having a planned time to return?
About ending the session in the part about starting before we go to the things that happened during the session too.
Well, this is sort of the mid-session break type thing that I was thinking to talk about first.
Mm-hmm.
So when
not
you're going to come back
every session has a mid-session break. It also depends on the length.
Well, even
every session has a beginning and end.
Yeah.
But like Stump Monkey's 2-hour sessions probably don't have much in the way of a mid-session break.
But most sessions do. I mean, either because like you need to take a break to, you might be a home session where you get a meal in the middle. It might be like a convention session where you're going to take a 10-minute break for people to stretch their legs, go to the bathroom, get some snacks or things like that. Mm-hmm. Having a plan for when you're going to have those breaks and then making sure that like everybody knows, hey, we're going to be back in. It's like, let's come back in 10 minutes or whatever. Usually that's a GM thing, more so to set that timing. But if people are kind of waffling on it, the players can certainly step in there too and, kind of make sure that you do come back in the time that is expected. As
a player, if the GM hasn't made expectations clear, rather than just wander off, you could even say, hey, I'm going to need to go to the bathroom. Like, this could be a good time for other people to do so as well, or something like that.
Or like, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Something like that.
It's important to keep lines of communication open so that people know how long you're going to be gone. Because if you're going to be back in 20 minutes, then they might need to play without you for a bit.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas if you're back in 5 minutes, then that's no big deal. So with talking about setup and cooldown times that happen for the session and for any break in between the session, maybe it does make sense to talk about wrapping the session before we talk about things that are in session.
Yeah, that sounds
wrapping
good to me.
is more similar to this.
Because we're talking about a lot of the transitions here.
Right. So when it comes to wrapping the session, it's important just sort of to know when to stop and to know what you need for a good end of a session as a player. And you can let the GM know that as well. Sometimes if you just like look at the clock and they're like, oh, no, we're at the end of our slot, okay, that's it. And like if it's org play, hand out chronicle sheets, for the GM hands out chronicle sheets and you just leave. That can, for many players, depending on your mindset, that can feel way less satisfying than even if the same sequence of events happened during the game. If you just sort of have a satisfying transition that eases you out of the game, it's less jarring than just suddenly being like, oh, yeah, the society said, great job, here's your chronicle sheets.
That's getting a little bit into the GM aspect. This is a player episode.
Yes.
Primarily, but yeah. So what do you do if you, so do you
have
recommendations for people if that happens?
I was saying that you need to set expectations sort of with the GM, depending on what you need, or like if you need a lot of time picking up your stuff because you have a lot of things that you took out, or you have, let's say you have another game that you're at a convention and it's very soon afterwards.
Yeah,
so you need to make sure it ends on time, as another example, or you need extra time to get to the next place because maybe you walk with a cane, or you have another reason.
That's a really fair point, because that is actually where I've seen where I've had those hard stops most often as a GM is when a player tells me near the end, oh yeah, by the way, I have to leave early, like half an hour before they have to leave.
Yep.
Whereas if I knew that from the beginning, I could have budgeted time. So yeah, if you have time constraints that would not be expected, then letting the GM know is a good call.
Because players often forget to do that, and because of the fact that when you're the player, right, you remember your thing, so it's easy to think, oh yeah, of course. But the GM probably doesn't know, even if it's something I give the example of like you walk with a cane and need a little bit more time to get to another room where the other games are. You might think, well, that's obvious to the GM without saying anything.
GM might
the GM has so many other factors that they're doing. They don't know you have a game afterwards.
Yeah.
It's just best to keep an open line of communication about what you need for the end of the session, and that will help the GM to try to build towards it. And if it doesn't look like they are, you can also remind them a half an hour before then. Hey, remember, like I said, I need this to end on time.
And whether you're in a public place or not, it's always good when everyone chips in to help clean up afterwards. Particularly if you've had, that can be packing up maps and things like that. If you've had food, wiping down the tables, cleaning things up, making sure that you leave the place as nice as it was when you found it.
And even if you're not in a public place, to just set up and sort of take down the game efficiently, let's say even just in your friend's home, you can offer as a player to help the GM if the GM takes more setup than anybody else to set things up and to take them down, because often the GM is going to actually be the rate limiting factor for both of those phases. So
yeah, and you can start tidying up your things somewhat during the session too when you don't need them anymore. I mean, GMs don't like to see the sort of equivalent of the teacher watches everyone as the bell comes and like packing away all their dice and whatever. But if you realize like, okay, yeah, I've used these things, I don't need them anymore, I can pack those away, and so you just have like a few things out that you still need to play.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, having pre-packed a little bit ahead of time, that can help.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is starting, stopping, and intermediate breaks. Let's go into talking about what you can do during the game. That's where most of efficient play comes in. Even though we did spend a good amount of time, I think a very appropriate amount of time talking about the transitions, because they're a big place you can lose efficiency and lose momentum. Talking about during the game is where you can wind up saving the most overall time. One of them has already come into chat. One of the things that is at least part of the genre of where you lose time in inefficient play, which is during combat encounters.
Yes.
During combat encounters, the thing that can make you lose the most time is analysis paralysis during your turn. And there are techniques as a player you can take to really, really save time, that if all the players take, can wind up give you twice as many combat encounters or more.
Yeah. I'd say, first of all, pay attention to what's happening when it's not your turn, so that you have a general sense of what you can do on your turn.
The cardinal sin of efficient play is being on your phone as the moment that your turn ends until your next turn begins. And then you look up and like, oh, what's the situation now?
Yes, and then you haven't been thinking about it, the GM has to re-explain it, you're not really sure what's going on, then you take your turn, then the next player who wasn't really paying attention, then everyone has to re-explain it, then they take their turn.
Then they take a while to decide because they weren't thinking about it. But if you're constantly watching, first of all, you might have reactions that you wanted to take that you will not be able to take because you're on your phone. And second of all, to be fair, most of the people I know who check out as soon as their turn is over also declare an intent to use a reaction of like, hey, the first time that the cleric gets damaged, I'm going to use my Glimpse of Redemption, then they go on their phone or something like that. So, but even so, just paying attention, and then that will mean that you don't need to reprocess all the variables because you probably started thinking about what you would do. And the more you're paying attention, the less likely that a monkey wrench came into your plan like just before your turn.
Yeah, because
still could happen. It has happened in many battles that I've been in. As a GM and as a player, but it's much less likely if you've been constantly paying attention than if you picked up your phone or went onto a laptop or something like that, and then came back. Then there's a whole round's worth of stuff that could have messed up with what your previous plan had been.
Yeah, because maybe new things came in, or maybe the fellow PCs defeated something that you didn't expect they were going to defeat, or maybe somebody used an ability that really changed the state of the battlefield.
That's right.
You just don't know. So if you pay attention all the way along and are ready for it, you can ask your GM, if they aren't already, to display the initiative in some sort of visible way, or to provide prompts or cues for when people are about to come up.
Yep.
So that you really know when it's time to plan.
I like to sometimes say
More
whose turn it is and also who's coming up next sometimes, so that they can think about what their turn is, especially if I am strapped for time. So it's very important to start thinking about your turn, but that doesn't mean that like we think that you must have been able to figure out what your turn is unless a giant game changer happened right before you and you can't have any time to think about it. But it also doesn't mean that you are responsible for being able to come up with an answer to some kind of ridiculous situation in a constrained period of time. You might want to, if you just are like, wow, this is a horrible situation for any of my usual ideas of what my character would do. I don't even know if there's something I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Or the situation is just evolving. You could delay your turn, or even just ask the other players and GM, is there anything I can do in this situation? Like, I'm a rogue. These are all immune to precision damage, and it's incorporeal, and my non-magic weapons aren't getting through any of its resistances.
Or saying, like, hey, I want to, guys, do you think we should go after the flying creatures first because they're shooting arrows at us from the sky? Or the mages who are creating entangle effects on the ground? So if you're not sure, like, hey, what's the party strategy going to be? Can we all plan together what we want to do? That doesn't mean you can't, like, change, but just paying attention to the situation so when your turn comes up, you're not starting from a what is even happening point.
Asking for help is great, and if our chat's responses to the episode about don't be too bossy to do players in case they don't want help are any indication, there's a lot of people out there who are just actually, they're not going to think lowly of you or be angry, upset, or annoyed. They're going to be delighted because they kind of wanted to help, but were worried that you would get mad at them if they were just telling you what to do. At your table, even if you don't know the people at your table, there's going to be somebody who is just like, ooh, I can't wait to tell you. Actually, the entangling spellcasters and the flying creatures are not really the problem. It's this other weird thing.
Yeah, exactly. And something we've glossed over here, but Rexel pointed out, so I want to point out more specifically, having usual ideas for what you would do on your turn is great for efficiency.
Yep.
And there's to build off of this too, and to mention something that I saw come up in the chat earlier. Having your bonuses written down in advance. So having your bonuses written down, that's both for your character sheet is fully filled out. You know what your saving throws or things like that. But if you have things that you do all the time, like, what is my damage when I am two-handing my weapon versus one-handing my weapon? What is my damage when I am enraged? Like, if you have these things that you do all the time, and they're not things that just instantly pop to your mind and you just know.
What's my damage on my second or third attack with my scimitar when I have forceful, so it goes up?
Yes, exactly. So writing those, having like a cheat sheet for yourself where you write those things down, common stuff that I do.
Here's another thing you can do. Let's suppose that your action is so certain to not be disrupted by the person who's going just before you that you are sure that you can take it. You can wind up pre-rolling some of your attacks. This is especially important in Pathfinder First Edition, where you could wind up like making 8 attacks or something like that. But you can pre-roll your attacks, get your GM's permission. They don't always like that because GM might know actually something could interrupt that.
Yeah.
Suddenly a vortex opens up to the abyss. But if you have permission, pre-rolling can help. Even if you don't have permission to pre-roll, rolling your attacks and damage together can be very convenient.
If you have different
and rolling
colored
your
dice,
flat check for your mischance at the same time is also good. I know that some players, like Linda, wants to roll her flat check first because she gets mad if she rolls them all and sees that the attack roll was a critical hit, especially if it was for a lot of damage.
Yes.
But for efficiency's sake, when time's of the essence, rolling all of them together can be a good idea.
Yeah, and one thing that really helps with that is different colored dice. Like, we have the big Chessex Bago dice, so we'll just generally grab dice of similar color families. Like, okay, the red ones are the first attack, the bluish ones are the second attack, and the grayish ones are the third attack. And then you can just go boom with everything at once and keep them all collected together so you can roll multiple attacks at the same time.
That's right. And when it comes to multiple attacks in Pathfinder First or Second, or even Starfinder, have your attack bonus for the multiple attacks also calculated. That way, I know -5 is not that hard, but -4 can be. And if you're a ranger, -3 definitely can be one.
And if you have to stop and say, wait a minute, is this a weapon that has a -4 or -5 or a -3? Hold on, I have to look it up. As opposed to having that written out on your sheet. Okay, this is what my bonuses are for my attack routine.
Right.
I guess and then in general, knowing what your abilities do, like when I play a class that I'm not as familiar with, then I like making cheat sheets of their abilities that I can quickly look at to summarize. Okay, these are all of this. These are like the spells they have prepared. These are the feats they have. These are like the ninja tricks. This is what they do. so that I can just look at it quickly and have a reference to the rules that doesn't require me to go back and flip through a bunch of stuff to figure out how their stuff works. So, like, my character sheets are littered with statements that are quick summaries of abilities, so that I'll understand, so I can read it and I can remember, oh, you know, my rogue's debilitating strike. How much of a penalty, like in first edition, my Unchained Rogue's debilitating strike. How much of a penalty does that give, and to what? What are my options? And I'll have that written out, debilitating strike, parentheses. Here's the list. Then I can just pick one of the things from that and not have to think about going back and looking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say if you're... I mean, I know GMs really vary on this in terms of physical dice versus digital dice. But particularly if you're rolling a lot of dice... a dice roller is a lot faster.
Definitely is more efficient.
Typing in something like, 12d6 plus 24, and then just boom, and having it do that versus counting them all
Some people
out.
have a very visceral need to roll 20d6 rather than do 20d6
and I'm not
on
saying,
a die
and
roll.
I'm not saying that you can't roll 20d6,
but it is way more efficient to do
yes,
on a die
we are
roll.
we are talking about efficiency of
Yes.
dice, and digital dice are certainly more efficient.
That's right.
Rex Liquid mentioned an engineer friend who was terrible at mental math after a full day of work. Let someone else at the table do addition for her, so that could be like another option too.
Mm-hmm.
And
And also, when you were talking about debilitations and defaults before, Rex Liquid mentions, which is something I try to do as well, if you have a menu of possible things you can do one of, to try to pick one to be your default that you use unless the situation really calls for a different one.
Yeah. For spellcasters, I like to have prepared spellcasters. I like to have sort of a few default lists that I'll have, and then I can switch out a little bit based on the situation. So it's like, okay, here's some of my favorite attack spells, here's some of my favorite buff spells, but then I can switch out a few based on what's going on. So I don't have to start from the beginning and say, wait, what's a good attack spell at this level?
Right. Or like the rogue in our
change
War
out
for
the
the
ones
Crown
that
game,
work well.
usually, since she's a thief, uses that debilitation feat to give herself the 2d6 extra damage dice on future attacks as her debilitation. But as the situation demands it, she changes to other ones, and now she has double debilitation, so she can put in 2.
A tip for quickly counting up large numbers of d6s, arrange the dice into groups of 10. That's one that I found really useful.
Into groups of 10?
Yeah, like groups that have to 10.
What makes the 10? Oh, you mean adding the numbers up to 10,
adding the
not
number.
10
Yeah,
dice.
adding the numbers up to 10s, like 10s,
So taking
10s.
6s and 4s,
And
or take
and
5, 3,
grouping
and
them up.
2, and group them
Yes.
up, and they're each at 10s.
Yeah. I find that makes it faster and makes it less likely for me to get lost about where I was at. I group as many groups of 10s as I can and then add the rest.
Yep.
And people have their own tricks.
Everyone has
That's the one that works for
mathematical
me.
trick when it comes to doing different kinds of math. I'll also give a overall tip for adding up numbers, 2-digit numbers. Do not listen to your elementary school math teacher. Do not add the ones place first. Add the tens place first. It makes it way faster to do mental math, and you get like some of the most significant information about the final result sooner, so that you add it up and you're like, oh, the tens place was in the 20s. Obviously, that's gonna miss, so I don't even need to do the rest of this.
Yeah, so you're talking about for like the D20.
Yeah, if you're just
Yeah.
adding 2 large double-digit numbers together, is always, if you always start from the tens place, it's much faster than starting from the ones place. And it's sort of more natural to how you think about the resulting number too, because you're going to be reading it left to right.
But math teacher
Teacher
ever
ever
taught
taught
you
to add
that
the
one
ones
place
place
first?
first?
My elementary school.
Every math instruction I've ever seen has said to add the ones place first, but it's just not good. And so doing mental math, or having someone like we were talking about before, from the suggestion, having someone who is faster do the mental math, is definitely a good way to speed things up, especially if you're not going to use a die roller, which is the more efficient option, even if it's less visceral than getting in there with all those d6.
I find that the more dice there are, the more I want to roll all of them.
Yep.
Because it's just fun, but...
Come on.
Yeah.
Yep. But
Boom.
it's not everything is efficiency, but you know what? efficient play means that we can be efficient in other ways so that you have more time to roll all the dice.
Yes, exactly.
There you go. So let's see. We talked about rolling dice, doing math, choosing your turn, having your turn predetermined.
Decisions.
Decision points that aren't your turn.
Yeah, so for example, the GM has presented a situation and the players are all having a discussion about what they want to do next. And it's kind of stalled out and people are just kind of like, nah, we could do that or we could do that. If you find yourself, you can certainly take the lead as a player and say, okay, I've heard a few different ideas. Some people are saying we should do this thing and some people are saying we should do this thing. Organizing those thoughts and pulling things together, or saying like, okay, here's a few factors that we can consider. Maybe it might be a good idea to here's some of the advantages I see for a direct assault and some of the disadvantages. Do people have any other ideas? You can facilitate the discussion among other players to keep things going, particularly if you notice that things are stalling out and people are kind of not really discussing things or distracted, or everybody's like, nah, I don't care.
Yeah.
And if nobody cares, then feel free to make a suggestion.
What's your plan? Coming up with a plan is something that can just grind the game to a standstill and make it take hours. Pre-buffing in Pathfinder 1st Edition, our group would take literally hours pre-buffing before an important encounter, just on deciding what they were pre-buffing and who was preparing what with what slots, because it could be a 7th level resist energy that only resists 20 versus an 11th level resist energy that resists 30 versus a bark skin that was from this source that was a lower bark skin than the other bark skin, and like 3 hours later.
One of the things
the
that
buffs
did help,
are ready.
One of the things that did help us with that is that we were able to say like same as last time after a while, and then
Eventually.
be like same. Eventually, we got to the same as last time point, but it would have saved a lot of time if we had been able to.
When the
set that up
halfling had his crushing factory of,
Yes.
of spells that had been determined that everyone was going to provide him.
Yes. But that was a player taking the initiative to
Yeah,
organize
he
the
did.
buffs, and then that made things a lot more streamlined.
That made him like the buff czar.
Yes, he was the buff czar.
And as a player, just when it comes to a decision point, trying to be decisive, or at least get, like Linda said, get the ideas out there and call for a vote. Try to simplify things down into a situation where there's not that many things, rather than, oh, but wait, this could go wrong. What about this other plan? It's especially tricky, though, when it's not even just, like, what's our plan for doing the thing, but, like, one of the endings where it's like, do you side with this person or that person? And then the group fundamentally really disagrees about that decision point of, like, Red Harvest has the lawful and the chaotic factions in it. Do you side with the lawfuls or the chaotic ones? And if your group is really divided, and it's a Pathfinder Society scenario, right? So you have 6 players, 3 of them really, really want the chaotic, and 3 of them really, really want the lawful.
Yeah.
What would you suggest for doing it efficiently?
I would say,
I know we've talked about generally getting along with people.
Honestly, if it's 3 and 3, that's more of the GM's call for handling things, because any one player could be seen as any one player trying to push things in one direction could be seen as them like trying to step out of what they should be doing to get what they thought should happen. So I'd say that's more of a GM call. You could propose.
Okay, what if it's not a vote yet, and it feels sort of like maybe it's 4 and 2, but people don't have formed opinions that are saying exactly lawful or exactly chaotic, but they're all discussing different things.
Yeah, I mean, you can propose a vote, but I think this is getting more into the GM territory of how to resolve this particular situation. However, if you are, let's say that the party is 5 and 1, and you're the 1. Let it go.
Build a giant ice castle and just leave the group.
No, don't leave the group. But what I'm saying is recognizing when the party is ready to move on, and everybody else wants to do one thing, you want to do something else, and then instead of focusing on like how are you going to keep trying to needle them and push them to do the thing you want to do, think about sort of how in character your character might be convinced to go along with that party plan.
This is not a reenactment of the play. I always say the wrong number of Angry Men. However many were on that particular jury.
Rexel says, "Grumble and prepare your 'I told you so' is in good fun."
Yes, you must prepare. Red, you can use it as a reaction. It's a contingency.
Yeah. So I would say that if it's
12.
clear that
That's what I thought.
if it's clear that the majority of the party wants to go along with a plan and that's not your plan, rather than digging in your heels after a certain point, you do need to kind of move on and decide how your character could be convinced to move along with that plan, because it's more interesting that way. Because then you could be more of a part of coming up with a story in that regard. But if it is really completely deadlocked, the GM's probably gonna have to do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like votes or roll-offs, like Rex the Liquid mentioned.
Yep. If it's more muddled and nobody's really sure what they want, that can be where it's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where players being proactive can help.
Yep.
Another thing we talked about that definitely was also in terms of efficiency in the episode about players stepping up and taking roles. If there's some weird complicated subsystem that involves assigning people to do things, you can have one of the you are one of the players, but you could have someone else do it if they're better suited for it too.
Mm-hmm.
Just take the role of a marshal who asks people, okay, what are we going to do? You're really good at knowledge, nature. You're the only one who is. Can you do those? I know you could also do this other thing, but 3 of us can do that.
Yeah.
And just sort of, even partially in character, have conversations, or out of character, whichever works best for your group, that can move towards actually deciding, sort of like clockwork, okay, that's what we're doing this time. GM, we're going to make our attempts, and then immediately roll into the next one, rather than just sort of a big discussion every time.
Mm-hmm.
Alright. So, we've got decision points and group discussions. We've got battles. And we sort of talked about preparing things, but...
I guess one other thing...
What else?
One other thing is, the amount of time that's spent on various things. So, if you find that there's something that you're spending a long time on, but it's really something that just your character is interested in, we have to talk about this advice from the GM side of, maybe pull things into a side session or wrap things up. But if you notice that, this particular encounter has been just your character talking to this NPC for the last 5 minutes and everyone else is bored.
Or the last hour.
Then, or the last hour, even worse. But going when you notice those sorts of things, wrapping it down, and then seeing if hey, if you want to have like a side session with a GM where you work on some of the stuff more, you can propose to the GM, hey, I'm still interested in this conversation, but I see that this is pretty much just the thing with my character. Can I send you an email later with some more of my thoughts or something?
So we
like that?
talked about another problem, but didn't offer a solution, which is a large amount of time preparing something, which is different than necessarily a group decision. Just the night happens during the session, and it's time to do your daily preparations, and you're a prepared spellcaster. The efficient way to do that is to have already prepared a few sets of basic spells that can handle common situations that you would go into, and then tweak those for the situation. So if you have like dungeon delving set of spells, it's like, oh, it's the ice tomb of the ice giants and their ice friends. You can put in some more fire and take out Cone of Cold. But you don't have to start from scratch every time there's a new situation. That's some people are like, well, maybe it's metagaming to have prepared those things, but it's playing your character. They would have favorites. They would have standbys, and they won't start from scratch just for each new situation. It's actually sort of less playing your character if you do.
Because then your character's like, oh, I seem to have forgotten spells that are my favorites.
Yes, I seem to have forgotten everything I knew about anything for this ice tomb of the ice giants and their ice allies. I will now start from first principles to determine what I'm going to do.
And so Monkey has a good point here. Arguing every point, quote, because it's what my character would do, end quote, can quickly become tiresome for everyone. It's far more effective to take a stand more rarely, but at times when it's interesting story-wise.
That's right.
Yeah.
Another thing that can wind up taking a long time for your characters with preparations is if you are playing, if you know it's hard for you to prepare, and it's hard for you to agree that you have like these set lists because you really, really need to customize them, and it always takes a long time. You could also like think about maybe you don't have a good fit in a group that has to do things on a quick timetable for playing a class that has a very large list of prepared spells, especially like Pathfinder First Edition clerics, where anytime Paizo prints an option, suddenly in world there's like an IM from your god being like, "Hey, look, we just got 52 new Aboleth only spells that now you can cast because a player companion came out about Aboleths," and then now you wind up with like over 10,000 different things you have to choose from. So you could maybe, like, having a wizard who at least you had to put them in your spellbook, and deciding your spellbook is something you can do outside of session. That can make all the difference. I'm not saying don't play a prepared spellcaster.
Well, I'd say self-limiting is valuable in that sense too. Like, for example, I might decide, hey, you know, I'm going to play a wizard in first edition or whatever, but I'm going to only pick spells from these sources, and I'm not going to bother looking into all these books because that's going to be too many to think about.
Yep.
You don't have to select from all possible options that exist.
That's true. And one thing that definitely helped our group in terms of not spending as much time on everyone preparing spells obsessively was definitely just being in Pathfinder 2nd Edition meant that at least it was just the daily start spells. There were fewer, like, low-level slots that people needed to obsess over because you don't get as many low-level slots. And there aren't times that were not the beginning of the day, but, like, midday where it's like, oh, we're going into this thing, let's prepare our buffs situation.
Yeah.
That got removed. So.
I think one of the main things is not having a bajillion different types of stacking buffs where we all have to keep track of which types stack with which types and don't stack with which types, and therefore which buffs are still worthwhile. And how the caster level scaling works on every spell, too.
Yep. You mean you haven't already memorized that 7 and 11, where the levels resist energy goes up at 6, 9, 12, are when you get 3, 4, and 5 on Bark Skin?
Yes.
No. Shield of Faith is
6 and 12 and 18, yes.
Are when you go up.
Yes.
And
6, 12, 18 is Shield of Faith. I thought you were going to say Shield of Faith.
No, 6, 9, 12 is Bark Skin.
Then you said 9. That's true.
Yep. It totally changed it. Now it was a different spell. That's right.
Yep.
So,
and a lot of people find that that having some kind of online character builder tool like Hero Lab can be super helpful for these sorts of things that you can use to build and that you can also use to, say, click to apply buffs.
Yep. It all depends on your playstyle and your mindset. Like, for me, it doesn't help me. But for a lot of people, it does. Although I've heard good things about some of the other, like, fan-made tools for that have come out in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so I have to try more of them and see if there are any that are just the right fit for me.
I haven't actually used a character builder in 2nd Edition yet. Other than the, like, not other than the thingies that we had for building the pre-generated characters, which, oh gosh, those are not, like, certainly not publication clean.
Yeah, considering Warlock says in the chat, I've heard good things about Path Builder, but I just haven't used any apps for 2nd Edition yet.
Yeah.
But when it comes to apps, spreadsheets, automatic calculations for anything you need to do that's complicated are a great way to play efficiently if they fit your style. But that doesn't mean that you should let, like, us on this show or somebody else who's like, oh no, obviously you would be faster with this app, tell you that you would if you are using it and it's actually slowing you down.
Or if you don't want to use it, like if it's not fun for you.
But we're talking about efficient play, so only you know what's most efficient for you, because everybody is a different style of learner, and that same style of learning could also is our style of play and the style of organizing your thoughts. And just, there's no way you're going to be able to predict it. Like, for me, if I take notes on something because of the fact that, like, I'm not great with my handwriting and writing something down with my hand uses a lot of my mental processing, I will not remember it. And ever. But as long as I'm not taking notes, as long as I'm just paying attention, watching someone, especially if they're writing it down somewhere and I see them do it and I'm listening, I have an extremely good memory at that point. So, like, that is not typical. That's not what you would normally hear.
You'll fully remember things that people said 5 years ago.
That's right.
But
as long as if I took notes on it, it's gone.
Then you won't remember the same day.
It's in the notes, so there is a record.
Yes, and then you have to go back and read your notes.
That's an example of me And
Mhm.
you probably have your own unique style in some way that nobody else can know and predict. So when people tell me, "Oh, take notes," it's a good advice for remembering NPCs from previous sessions, and I know that's not how it works for me.
Yeah, which is part of why for our group, instead of like him taking notes before sending notes around, I like to be the one who takes the notes. And
Yep.
and then you wouldn't be like the note taker during a session, for example, because
That's
that
right.
would pull you out of the session.
Or the map drawer.
Or the map drawer,
my
and
gosh.
things like that. Whereas for me, I find that taking those notes and seeing that information out there pulls me in. So
That
that's
is
helpful.
more normal.
Yes.
Most people have some aspect of kinesthetic learning and interacting with things and are not weird like me. So, we've
I like the way you're weird.
Well, thank you, Linda. So we've talked about overall making sure to use your own style when it comes to efficient play. Don't just listen to us about something if you're convinced it won't be efficient. I mean, you can try it, but if it isn't, do it the way you do it that's more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And don't be afraid to try out new strategies.
Yep. Try it out. If you're at Gen Con in a super crunch slot and your your GM is like, we have even less time than you think because there's a special after this, like that might not be the best time to try an experimental strategy that might take longer, but find a low pressure time to just try something new and see, is this more efficient? Is it fun? Because one thing, when you have efficient play, the point of efficient play is not just to speedrun as fast as you can, it's to make more time for the fun stuff. Give you more time to role play and interaction. That could be that decision that we talked about how to do it faster that's really interesting. Like when Stump Monkey was saying some of them are interesting.
Yeah.
So the point of it is to be able to linger and spend time on what you love and get more of that. So do not ever let our advice for efficiency be a sort of a bludgeon that you use on yourself to get rid of the things that you like to be more efficient, because then it sort of has defeated its own purpose.
Well, I mean, I think that we were talking here about things that are some of the more common things that people find annoying, like spending time sitting there while people decide what they want to do on their turn, and sitting there while no one's talking and a decision needs to be made, or things like that. But like, because we do like on this show to discuss the most extreme examples of something, in part because they Mark likes to troll me. But really
it's
more
not
so
because I like to troll you. I'm not saying I don't like to troll you.
You do like to troll me, but really more so because these sort of more out there situations can give advice that works for everything without really making people feel like we're calling them out for what they like to do. So if we come with a ridiculous example, then of like everyone is sitting there and no one is talking, or like every single player in a row, no one is paying any attention, and the GM has to re-explain every single turn.
Yep.
Then nobody's gonna feel like we're calling them out.
That's correct. That is the main reason I do it. Is I've been on enough online discussions about all sorts of these topics to know that anything I do short of the really, really extreme versions is actually someone's position, and I don't want that position to be the example we give of the bad thing.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
As long as it's more extreme, then it's going to be fine. So yeah, I think we got it.
Yeah, efficient play in under an hour.
Yeah, it was efficient. Let's say bye to YouTube, and then we can do our last few things with Twitch.
Sounds good.
Bye, YouTube. See you next time.